our culture has often got fixated, I think, that's perhaps not too strong a word, on self-realization, on discovering who I really am and then being true to that. And indeed, that's one of the major cultural imperatives that we have. So, and a lot of people think that that's basically what Jesus taught. Jesus, of course, said it exactly the opposite. If you want to find yourself, you have to lose yourself. If you want to save your life, you have to give it away. And then he went and did it himself. And many people have looked at the life of Jesus and thought, he was just getting going. He was in his early 30s and had the world at his feet and was doing such a really neat job. Why did it all have to get thrown away? And there is just a huge paradox there. But it seems to go like this, that the illness, the sickness that has infected the human race, which the Bible has a number of words for, rebellion, idolatry, sin, death, they all kind of flow in and out of one another, is a very, very serious disease, which much in the modern world has tried to belittle. You know, that now that we've got electric light and good drains and proper education, we don't need to worry too much about sin anymore. And some people have actually stopped in church services having public confession of sin. I was in a church recently where you could go for a week and worship every day, but without ever confessing your sin. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily the worst thing out, but actually it's a capitulation, I think, to something in the culture which is saying, actually we're all right, we're okay, all that sin stuff is for gloomy people way back when. And that's not so. If there's a sickness, it's better to diagnose it and to see what the treatment is. And the treatment is the death of Jesus, but the death of Jesus then has to be applied to our own lives. And so one of the most moving passages in the New Testament is when St. Paul says, I have been crucified with the Messiah, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but the Messiah lives in me, and the life I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. And there's a sense that in order to be found by that love and to give love in answering, one has to give up everything else, including what might have been bubbling up from within one, all sorts of desires and hopes and aspirations which might be perfectly good in themselves, as well as desires and hopes and aspirations which would be perfectly bad in themselves. I mean, Jesus did say that it's the stuff that comes out of us that defiles us, and Jesus gave a rather horrible list of all the things that comes bubbling out of our hearts unbidden. And when you see that, you realize, actually, we need to die to that. This is not good for us, and it's not good for the world, and it's not honoring to God. That needs to be put to death. So Paul says in Colossians, put to death, therefore, all that is earthly in you, and then you come alive as a new creature in Christ.
So, I know you've been to our land a couple times, but I don't know if you're familiar or not, but our culture doesn't really nurture or facilitate the art of surrender.
Art of surrender. No, as I say, it's very difficult in the Western world as a whole, because ever since the Enlightenment in the 18th century, we've had this sense that we are now the grown-up ones, and the rest of the world is still, struggling, but we've actually made it. We've got modern science and technology, modern democracy, this, that, and the other. So basically, we're on top of the world. And economically, of course, that's by and large true, although there's a very long and difficult story to tell about that in terms of our own arrogance and greed and overconsumption, etc. But the idea of surrender, there are always some people who actually are grasped by that vocation. And I know that the monastic vocation has not actually had a huge number of adherents recently, but I know enough people who have given up significant things, given up the prospect either of marriage or of a well-paying job or whatever, and just said, actually, I'm going to give my whole self to Jesus. And I'm not sure what he's going to do with that, but it's going to happen. And they are some of the most enriched and enriching people I know. I shall be, God willing, in a week's time visiting an elderly lady in Oxford who has been a nun for over 50 years, and she's now nearly 100 years old. And she is one of the most delightful people, and the least, as it were, unfulfilled, and yet in human terms, she's this funny little old lady who's never got married, who's never had any money, who's never done anything with her life other than sit in that convent and one or two others that she's moved to from time to time, and pray with people, which she's done a lot of. And in human terms, this was a life thrown away. But in God's terms, it's very clear this is a life richly fulfilled. And this takes a certain kind of guts and courage to say, I'm actually going to give this up. And then it's up to God what I get back instead. And often it'll feel for a while as though you get nothing back instead. Oh, well, look at you, silly you, for giving all that up. But actually, when you give yourself over to Jesus and really mean it, then there is no knowing what he can and will do.